Hey freaks and friends, welcome to day one of the 31 days of October. The daily content begins today as we begin to celebrate 45 years of Halloween as a franchise. And what better place to start the celebration than with the one that started it all, the Immortal classic. Make sure to stab that subscribe button and slash that bell icon so you don't miss out on this daily Halloween content all through the month of October. John Carpenter's Halloween was released on October 25th, 1978, and the film stars Donald Pleasance, Jamie Lee Curtis, Charles Cyphers, Nancy Loomis, and PJ Soles. And the film itself was, of course, written by John Carpenter along with Deborah Hill. We all know the famous story there that John Carpenter wrote all the dark and sinister stuff, where all the teen girl talk was handled by Deborah Hill. So the plot is one we are all familiar with, but for the sake of presentation, I'm going to go through that real quick. So 15 years after killing his sister, Michael Myers escapes a mental hospital where he begins to stalk Jamie Lee Curtis's character Laurie Strode, who is babysitting, and he stalks her and her friends. All the while, his psychiatrist, Dr. Sam Loomis, played wonderfully by Donald Pleasance, is out on the hunt, trying to get Michael back to Smith's Grove or kill him if that need be the case. So that is the plot in a nutshell. This is a plot that we're all pretty familiar with. Not only is it because we've all seen this movie countless times, but there were several knockoff films in the years to follow, films that decided to take the same formula and say, hey, we're going to do that same thing, but we're going to tweak it up a little bit. And that was something that really happened. That was with the slasher boom in the early 80s. And it is almost up for debate whether or not Halloween really launched the whole slasher subgenre. You could definitely make an argument on there. Some would say yes, Halloween kicked the doors open for slashers, where others would argue that it didn't really kick the door open, but it knocked loudly at the door and caught the attention of potential viewers and future filmmakers there. The film's influence cannot be understated. This is easily one of the most influential horror films ever to be made. But before we cover all those parts that everybody knows, let's get into some of the little funner sides of this film. Well, beginning by taking a look at characters, we of course have Dr. Sam Loomis, played by Donald Pleasance. This is a character who of course is named after the character in Psycho. No, they are not the same character, and I think it would be pretty silly if they were the same character. I could see the merit in the little online theory for that, but I don't know, it's just one that's a little bit silly. There's a little too much going on there to really stretch the believability there, and I'm all for some wacky theories now and again. Dr. Loomis is really interesting because in a lot of ways he's sort of the Van Helsing to the Dracula for Myers there. It's a dynamic that's not too present in this film, but it's one that becomes a lot more apparent in the further sequels going forward. Donald Pleasance's performance as Dr. Loomis is without a doubt the standout performance in the film as far as actual actors go. He was the seasoned actor on the set here. It's very well known at this point that that role could have easily gone to Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing. Both of them turned it down. I'm morbidly curious to see what Halloween could have been with either one of those guys. That would have just been absolutely insane to picture that. But the gravitas that Donald Pleasance brings to this role, it helps to really sell the fear and the terror that's going on, sort of lurking in the shadows there.
Death has come to your little town, Sheriff. You can either ignore it or you can help me to stop it.
Where Myers does not express himself, we sort of have to use Donald Pleasance as sort of a conduit there to really understand just how terrifying and threatening Myers is. Of course, we do see what Michael does, but to sort of hear how Myers has affected Dr. Loomis over the last 15 years is one thing that I think really makes this character one that works, one that's definitely a standout in horror altogether. It's one of those little things, I don't know if John Carpenter was really thinking in terms of, like, he definitely wasn't thinking in terms of franchise, but I don't think he wrote this character expecting people 45 years later to really be thinking, man, this character is on some deep level shit. If you really think about it, that's really where the character of Dr. Loomis is here. Again, 15 years of stress and having to deal with this little bastard Myers. It has affected him, and it has him scared knowing that this guy is out on the loose again 15 years later to try and recreate the crime that he had committed when he was a child. He has a lot of great moments here. The monologue in the Myers house there,
I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes.
It's just an absolutely great moment there. It's a lot of fun when he's staking out the Myers house and you see Lonnie and his friends coming up and, hey Lonnie, get your ass away from there. You know, that whole bit, that never gets old. And gotta love the little smile he does there. Shooting Myers at the end of the film, that was really great. And we also have Jamie Lee Curtis making her big feature appearance here. This was sort of her break into stardom here. This was before she would do Prom Night and Terror Train and eventually move on to like bigger Hollywood films. Like, this was definitely her scratching the surface of her stardom there. And of course, the very famous story is the reason why she got the role in the first place was because of her mother, who she actually had the chance to work with in The Fog, and I think they did a TV show together at one point. It was like an episode of some show. I don't know which one it was off the top of my head. You can't argue Laurie Strode's icon in the Halloween franchise, in horror period. This was definitely the character in, of course, the most bare bones form, where when the character was first introduced to us, she's just some girl that Myers happened to see. She is wholly uninteresting as a character, but that, I think, allowed for younger females back in 78 to probably use that sort of blankness of Laurie's personality to sort of put themselves in that situation, like, oh my god, what if this was me in that situation? And I think that was a pretty cool little thing there. She is, of course, the goody-good girl out of the bunch. She's the babysitter, the good old Girl Scout, as she says in the film. Very shy, very timid, and that's ultimately what allows her to help conquer evil by the end of the film. And of course, you have her friends, played by PJ Soles and Nancy Loomis. They play Linda and Annie respectively. Their performances aren't the best, but their performances are fun. The performance by PJ Soles as Linda is totally a blast in this film. Like, I totally love to watch her walk around and talk about how she's totally the it girl, you know? It gets pretty annoying sometimes. Once you really notice just how much she says that, it gets totally ridiculous, but we totally love it. Annie Brackett, this is a character that I used to not really like at all in this film. Like, I really used to just loathe Annie. But in recent years, I have come to really like her as a character. Yeah, some of Nancy Loomis's portrayals in this film, like some of her little line deliveries are a little bit of a, like, why'd you have to say the line like that? I don't know. I've just come to appreciate it over the years, though. It's like, she's just a sarcastic little bitch. I love it. I don't know. She's definitely my favorite out of the girls now. Like, I used to, again, not really care for her, but as I've grown over the last 20 years since I first watched this film, there's something spunky about her that I find. She's in that little middle ground right between Laurie and Linda, where Linda's kind of the airhead bimbo, and Laurie's just kind of the good girl who's going to keep to herself. Annie's that girl who wants to live a little bit. Of course she doesn't. She's the one you would want to take home and introduce to your parents, you know, be like, hey, this is the girl I think I want to marry. Like, I can totally see Annie being that one there. Their performances work in the context of this film, but they're definitely not going to be getting any retroactive Academy Awards or anything for their performances here. Just fun performances, that's really what matters here. Charles Cyphers, those of you who have followed the John Carpenter series that I'm working on, that's of course on pause right now, you guys know every time I see him on screen in a John Carpenter or Carpenter related film, it just makes me smile, because there's something about his presence that's just a lot of fun. He just seems like that guy he's kind of old, keeps to himself, you know, like, in this one, he's definitely a sheriff who's, like, doesn't want to really have to deal with the consequences of a psycho breaking out of an asylum, but he wants to get the problem solved before it does get out of hand. We'll see more on that in the next film, albeit briefly. But his performance in this one, it's a little underutilized, but you know, that's kind of the thing. So, Charles Cyphers is one of those actors that in a lot of these Carpenter films, you only see him just enough to appreciate his presence. His acting isn't really great enough to merit him being a big star in the films, but he's enjoyable here. Kind of a lousy sheriff, kind of a lazy sheriff, but he's definitely involved in some of the coolest scenes, palling around with Dr. Loomis. And then, of course, we have Michael Myers, or simply credited The Shape, portrayed by Nick Castle. This is the gold standard for Myers. Like, if you're ever going to be playing Michael Myers and you're told to watch at least one Halloween film to get an idea how to portray Myers, this is the film you watch. You watch Nick Castle's portrayal. He's got the fluid movement, it's got that sense of urgency, but it also has that little air of, I'm going to take my time, I'm in no hurry to get to you, because I will get to you. And that's one thing I think is really cool about the way Myers moves. Like, when you see him following Jamie Lee Curtis across the street there, like, he's not in a hurry, but he is absolutely terrifying. What I think really makes him effective too is how they sparingly use him in this film. Like, we only catch small glimpses of him early on in the film, in the first act, in the second act, and then come the third act, he's there front and center. You know, we just get little glimpses of him, and he's definitely got a lot of haunting moments. Of course, when he's across the street from the school there, and you just see him right by the car, and she looks back out the window and he's not there. That's fucking freaky. One scene that always really impacts me, like, just mentally, is the part where the girls are in the car driving on their way to go babysitting, and Myers is in the car right behind them. You got Don't Fear the Reaper playing, and the scene right after that too, where you have Donald Pleasance and Charles Cyphers right in front of the hardware store, and they're talking about meeting up to talk about the whole Myers situation. And you see Donald Pleasance, he's got his back to the street, and you see the little car coming, and, you know, Donald Pleasance looks that way, car comes, and as the car passes behind him, he turns that way. That whole scene is just absolutely like, oh my god, dude, you were so damn close. Little things like that, I think, really sell Myers as a character. The mask in this film too, the mask is perfect in this. It's the William Shatner face. The common thing is that it was a Star Trek mask. Honestly, it looks a little more like it came out of the Devil's Reign, but that's just me. Like, it looks more like the faces in Devil's Reign. Even kind of looks like Travolta's character in the Devil's Reign. But I'm not here to argue the legend and the lore on that. That's just an observation I made. If you Google John Travolta Devil's Reign, you're gonna see a face that looks a little more similar to the Myers mask than William Shatner from the Devil's Reign. I swear it's the Devil's Reign, not Star Trek. That's just me, guys. Let's discuss down below. But yeah, all that stated though, Myers' scare factor in this is absolutely top tier. Very Phantom-like. Just the way you see him there and then he disappears. That says more than all the stabbing could ever do. And speaking of the stabbing, the kills that he has in this one are pretty tame, but they're still pretty effective. They are classics in the context of the series. Of course, the Bob kill is probably the one we all remember the most here. And the kill of Judith Myers. That is one kill that is it's the catalyst for the franchise. It's the one that, it's what you see within the first 5 minutes of the film, and that really sets the tone for not only this film, but it's the little linchpin for the whole franchise. But the kills in this one are iconic, albeit a little bit tame. They're good kills for what they are. Mostly bloodless, which is one thing that a lot of people tend to forget here. I remember seeing this when I was like, I don't know, I was somewhere between 6 and 8 years old when I saw this one the first time. And I remember this movie being bloody as shit. And watching it as a teenager, I'm like, this movie's pretty tame. That's just one thing about this film that really works pretty great there, is that theater of the mind there that plays with the kills and everything. Like, you know what's going to happen. So it's that your mind is already in overdrive there, thinking that, oh my god, this is going to be a bloody mess. So you're thinking that somewhere in your brain it projects that as sort of the aftermath to any stabbing that goes on in here. Taking a look now at mood and atmosphere in the film. And this, we're not going to just talk about the atmosphere by itself, but going to take a look at the cinematography and the music, that sort of Halloween feeling and the tension in this film, and just sort of how all those work together. The music, first of all, is really effective in here. It's simple, but it's something that just really carries the film. You guys have heard me sort of geek out on it throughout the whole John Carpenter series, where anytime he composes music, he doesn't try to make it to where it's distracting in the context of the film. He does make it memorable, but when he makes his scores, he looks at it as if he's laying down carpet in an apartment. You know, you don't want the carpet to be the main thing you're thinking about when you walk into a room. It's just supposed to be there, kind of support the room, make it feel right, but you're not thinking about it. And that's what the music really does in this film. It's there, it helps to sell the mood, it sets the mood, it definitely creates a lot of tension, it grips you, but you're not thinking about the music. It always makes me think too of that story when they were talking about, I think it was Erwin Yablans who was talking about this, at the theater when he was watching people watch Halloween. Like, a lot of people were covering their ears. Like, they weren't covering their eyes like you would normally see people reacting in a horror film, like watching them. Like, the music was what was scaring the people. But the music, top 10 chef's kiss. A lot to say that's already been said. I don't want to repeat it too much. And with the cinematography too, of course, we got to mention Dean Cundey's work here. It's one of the perfect pairings with John Carpenter is Dean Cundey's camera work. Of course, we all know what the film looks like. It's those wide shots, those very open shots that, as the film progresses, they start to tighten while maintaining this open width to them. And it's one of those things that just, it really is one of the pieces that really makes this film great. The lighting that is used in a lot of the shots, that little blue, really creates this nice cold feeling. One particular shot sequence is going to be the opening of the film, when we're sort of forced to go through the point of view of Myers as a child. That is one of those things, it's like we don't want to be in this sort of perspective, but we are literally forced into it. And that, I thought, was a pretty effective thing there. And it's one of those things too, again, it starts very open, but as soon as he picks up the clown mask, it kind of closes our field. It makes us feel a lot more confined in that space of looking through the eyes of a psychotic child. Of course, we don't know yet that it's a child until a few moments later, and we get that nice little tableau there, which might come back a few films later, quite a few films later. But you have that nice slow shot pulling back after his parents take the mask off there. A lot of the shots in this film are really great too. Like, you can take some stills from this film, and they're just a lot of iconic pieces. Of course, you got the Ghost Bob. Of course, you have the head tilt. All these different moments just look great, and I think if you had just had some mediocre cinematographer off the streets, it might not have worked as well. The only other person, just knowing the repertoire they have with John Carpenter, the only other guy who could have made this work would have been Gary Kibbe.
But they have not been working together yet. That would still be quite a few years later. Why am I talking about the Carpenter series? That's going on somewhere else.
The Halloween feel too, that autumn feeling, is one thing that's really present in this film. Definitely feels, if you take away the palm trees, like it's in the Midwest. You sort of get that feeling, like the way it's lit outside, it definitely looks like it's a chilly day at the end of October. It just looks chilly. You have the fake leaves on the ground there. It definitely just sells the feel. It definitely has the autumn vibe going on pretty strong here. It's definitely not the strongest autumn vibe in the series. We'll talk about that more as the series progresses here. But the fall vibe is definitely passable here. So a lot of the terror in this film too, the tension, the suspense, all that fun stuff. Again, it's some top 10 level stuff here. I will always mention the car ride, just knowing that Myers is behind them. They don't realize what the fuck is closing in on them. That is some intense stuff for me as a viewer personally. And the third act in this film, too, is one of those things where the terror, the suspense, the tension, all that stuff is just driving high on 11 there. Of course, it begins with Jamie Lee Curtis walking across the street to the Wallace house, totally unaware of her friends being dead over there. As audience members were probably like, oh no, don't do that. Don't do that, Jamie Lee. Do not go over there. So everything that happens from that point, when she finds Annie with the Judith Myers headstone, to the point where she runs back to the Doyle house, and she has the showdown with Myers. The sit-up, another one of those iconic moments, leading right up to the point where Dr. Loomis comes into the house and shoots Myers out the window, and they find that Myers is not lying in the grass anymore, and we get the closing shots with all the places he'd been throughout the film, with the sound of his breathing and the score. It causes all the terror that you felt throughout the film to still be lingering with you. It doesn't allow it to let up, which is something that I thought was really interesting considering the way that the tension sort of works throughout the film. And this just goes to show what a genius Carpenter was as a filmmaker, where he would tighten everything. He would make you feel all that tension. He'd sort of let you feel okay about yourself, make you not feel so bad, and then start to pull you back in, only to make you feel comfortable again, and then ring you in a couple more times, and just kind of kept repeating that. The final shot, though, doesn't allow for us to sort of have that feeling of, oh good, it's over, we can feel good about everything now. And that's something that he sort of does throughout his filmography, where it's like, you leave with that same sort of tension that you felt throughout the third act of any John Carpenter film, and this one is no damn exception there. If anything, this is the gold standard to that there. But yeah, John Carpenter's Halloween is a film that is one of the most revisitable in the franchise. Is it a sort of overviewed, over-talked about film? Sure. It most definitely is. I should know. This is the third video I've made where I am reviewing this film. But it's one of those films that, despite being over-talked about, sometimes overpraised, it deserves every little bit of overpraise that it gets. You could go and say it's overrated. I wouldn't blame you for saying that. But it's one of those films that you can't take away the value that it brings to horror as a genre. Again, it's one of those ones, it's right up there with like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Psycho and The Exorcist, where you can say, yes, it is one of the greats, but I don't love it. That's your right as a horror fan to say that. I love this one. I adore it. I adore all the films that came after it. I mean, of course I adore this one. But you can't take anything away from this film. Even if you were to try, you just wouldn't be able to. You just can't do it. But yeah, this is one that I revisit every year around this time of year. I'm definitely going to be watching it a couple more times this month. Of course, I've watched it before doing this video here. Did I need to watch it? Probably not. I could have just started recording without watching it, but I used it as an excuse to watch it again. And it's one of those films too that I don't only limit watching to October. Sometimes I will just play this fucker in the middle of May. In closing, guys, John Carpenter's Halloween is a film that more than deserves its place in the horror pantheon there. It's one of those films that is still going to be talked about in the next 50, 100 years or so. It's one that's going to be like we look at Frankenstein and stuff like Psycho now. I mean, we are already starting to look at Halloween through that same sort of lens, but it's going to be amplified in the next 100 years when this film is still there, but we are all gone. It's a film that's still going to be talked about, and it deserves every ounce of praise that it's going to get in the future. Again, it might be overrated to some, and I more than respect the opinion on that, but this is a film that I think deserves every bit of respect that it does get. It's one that really, that's exactly the thing there. Respect it, you don't have to love it, but you've got to understand that this film is important. If this one hadn't come out, we wouldn't have had all the great horror films that followed over the next 5 years following that, and then the 40 since then. It just wouldn't have happened without Halloween. But you guys know me, the score that I'm giving Halloween is going to be 5 420 car rides out of 5. This is an absolute perfect film. It's a must-watch. Check it out if you haven't. Watch it again. There you have it, guys. That was my third review of Halloween. Why? It's got to be done. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please be sure to play with the icons down there, do all that fun stuff. Hit the notification bell at least so you don't miss out on any of the subsequent days of the 31 Days of October. Again, we're going to be talking Halloween all month long to celebrate 45 years of this remarkable franchise. Is it overdone? Sure, but it needs to be done. See you guys tomorrow. Thank you for watching.